Doom Eternal right around the corner, I decided to take this time to replay every single mainline Doom game in the franchise. With this being my all-time favorite series, it's hard to rank them from, quote, worst to best, so in this case we're going to be ranking them from least best to best. And I have to say, playing these games back to back opened my eyes to a lot of things from the older games as well as the newer. But without further ado, this is every single Doom campaign ranked right before Doom Eternal hits. Right off the bat, I'm going to cheat a little bit by sort of combining number 8 and number 7 with Master Levels at number 8 and Final Doom at number 7. I'm doing this simply for time, as well as I basically have the same criticisms for both of them. Without getting super in-depth yet about what makes Doom, Doom, you have to know that the Master Levels and Final Doom were not made by id Software, and while they are good games that were designed for people who had already mastered Doom, there are so many things like unfair enemy placement and flat-out strange level design that really stick out. That being said, Master Levels for me is still a couple of good levels mixed with mostly mediocre to bad ones. On any difficulty, the Master Levels are very tough, but they aren't always tough for a good reason. While Master Levels is an official release from id Software, it's basically a group of levels hacked together. Final Doom isn't nearly as inconsistent as Master Levels for me, but it is still widely imbalanced when it comes to the quality of good levels versus bad. And to say that these levels won't want to make you smash a keyboard or controller against a wall would be a lie. The Plutonium experiment for me is by far the harder of the two, and the common criticism of this map pack is the overuse of the chain gunner. I really do have to agree with that. The nature of the chain gunner is that he can lay waste to you from a distance with a hit scanner type attack, and it's so easy to get completely blindsided by someone you haven't even seen in the distance. Even on the easier difficulties with less monsters, the chain gunners will still wreck you over and over to the point you'll be quick saving from every other room just in case you happen to run into a group of them. TNT Evolution is a bit more straightforward, and while it isn't always the best to look at from a design perspective, I enjoyed it more than I did Plutonium. While it's still insanely difficult and unfair at times, I found it less unfair than Plutonium. But that's where I'm going to leave it for these two. These games are not bad by any means, but they are wildly inconsistent in terms of what makes a good level in Doom. I'm going to get more into exactly what that is as we make our way through the list, but both Master Levels and Final Doom are the weakest in the franchise for me, especially when it comes to the classic Doom formula.
Hell reaches out for what is ours. We have been unbound. They have arrived, my true. As I promised, rise up, awaken.
Again, for the sake of time, I'm going to cheat a little bit with number 6. Doom 3 Resurrection of Evil has a lot of the same criticisms as Doom 3 for me, so when I talk about Doom 3, I'm going to be sort of talking about both of them. That being said, even though with the introduction of the double barrel shotgun, or the super shotgun, I do find Resurrection of Evil a little bit weaker than Doom 3. Doom 3 in general is a very different game, and while Resurrection of Evil builds off of that, it also sort of tries to course correct with a slightly more action-based game akin to the more classic games. But it does this while introducing things like the artifact and the grabber into the fold, which just feel out of place. The artifact in particular makes everything laughably easy from a combat stance, and while it can be used in some unique ways to solve puzzles, the puzzles are really never that challenging. I think you could also argue that these types of puzzles don't really belong in a Doom game to begin with. Doom 3 was a lot less of an action game than previous games in the series, and trying to retrofit these action pieces that are more akin to classic Doom doesn't really fit in the end. The short runtime, I have to say, is a good thing as it doesn't overstay its welcome, and while it does finish the storyline started in Doom 3, it overall sort of feels like a sidestep and an experiment. Doom 3 Resurrection of Evil wasn't made by id either. It was also made by a third party in an attempt to sort of elongate the life of Doom 3. For that reasons, it's pretty weak in the list for me. It's still fun and worth checking out if you're a fan of Doom, but it is just sort of kind of there in the end. think it's terribly shocking to see Doom 3 come in on the lower half of the list. Doom 3 is a game of its time, and while I still think it's a great game at its core, in terms of a Doom game, I don't think it quite lived up to the name attached to it. But you also have to remember that Doom 3 came out at a time where it was something that people couldn't fathom as being real. This was during the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube era when designers and developers were really starting to get a feel of what it meant to render things in 3D with high fidelity. You have games like Rogue Squadron on the GameCube rendering amazing visuals at the time in 60 frames per second, and then the PS2 games like Final Fantasy X and GTA 3 pushing genres forward. But none of them looked even remotely close to the visual fidelity of Doom 3. Doom 3 had animations and visuals that just had not been seen before. It rivaled 3D animated movies at the time, and the complex lighting and shadows just flat out didn't seem possible on modern tech. And in some cases, it really wasn't in terms of meshing it with the Doom game. The visual prowess of Doom 3 helped keep the hype going for the years leading up to Doom 3. Many gamers, including myself, were dying to just see what this game could pull off when it would finally be released. And when it did, gamers quickly realized that Doom 3 was Doom in name, but a lot of the fast-paced action and complex level design they go to Doom for was flat out missing in Doom 3. Doom 3 used its tech to make something new for the Doom franchise. It focused more on horror and visual design to create an atmosphere that was quite different from its roots. The gameplay was built around these limits of the engine and what could be done on modern hardware. And even if you were upgrading your machine in preparation, you still probably had some issues at times. Doom 3 was a computer killer. Even the highest end machines at the time running a 6800 GT or a 9800 XT, Doom 3 would bring your machine to its knees with the complexity of the visuals and tech behind it. And the tech really is ultimately what forced Doom 3 into this weird spot in the franchise. While id Tech pushed the original Doom to its greatness, id Tech 3 pushed Doom 3 to just being a okay shooter with jaw-dropping visuals. Even with this caveat, Doom 3 is still a fun game to play through. Atmosphere is something that Doom 3 not only gets right, but it could be argued that it set the bar for what atmosphere means in a game today. Something like Dead Space really calls back to something like Doom 3. With the horror element being doubled down on, and while it doesn't help the gameplay in terms of pacing, it does create something that is truly terrifying at times. The sound effects of the demons and general world around you will always make you feel uneasy. The ambiance created in this one will make you question going down a hallway and have you looking around trying to guess what might come out at you. And even though I've finished this game many times, I'm still caught off guard and freaked out when something gets in my face. But that being said, the cost of the atmosphere came with the sacrifice of familiar Doom gameplay. The gameplay is much slower than other games in the series, and again, due to the limits of the engine and what computers could achieve at this time, the amount of enemies on screen is very small compared to other Doom titles. Having only a few enemies on screen at times is something you will have to get used to, thus creating a game that focuses on trying to catch the player off guard rather than rewarding them for playing well. The PDA was also introduced as a way to create more backstory and force the player to interact with computer surfaces in the game to unlock some doors and discover secrets by roaming through emails and audio logs to get the codes to storage units. While this does help flesh out the world at times, if you want to get all the secrets and goodies hiding in Doom 3, you're going to be doing a lot of reading, which is not something I really want to do in a Doom game. But to get back onto the pacing, I hadn't booted Doom 3 since the BFG edition released back on the 360, and while I do remember feeling the pacing was a bit lopsided then, in a post-Doom 2016 world, Doom 3 feels crazy slow at times. This is due to the environments basically looking identical, and while the ambiance and the atmosphere is there is a lack of variety, and there's not a lot of levels set in hell, which is kinda crazy. Something else that stuck out to me that was kinda weird is that the inclusion of the flashlight being shoulder-mounted in BFG edition is a really weird design choice. The original version of Doom 3 had the flashlight as its own item in the weapon slot, resulting in a game that, for many players, had them switching back and forth, constantly breaking the flow of combat. But it also created a sense of panic when you had your flashlight out and were suddenly in need of a weapon for combat. In fact, I think it's debatable that removing the flashlight from the weapon selection and having it being able to be on basically at all times due to its very fast recharge rate was a bad addition for the BFG edition. This change most definitely makes Doom 3 not as scary, but then you could also argue that's what harmed Doom 3 in the first place. It might have been an attempt to sort of speed things up and let players kind of play more like Doom, but you can't really retrofit things like that. Also, the enemy variety in Doom 3 is there, but due to once again there being limits of what computers can do, you aren't ever faced with a ton of different enemy types at once. Most enemies have one goal, and that is to get in your face ASAP and wreak havoc all over you. That dance of trying to take out certain enemies due to their sheer damage output at long ranges is almost absent from Doom 3. The Revenant makes a return, and its seeking rockets are by far one of the most deadly things in the game, but due to the lack of having to juggle it along with a lot of other enemy types, it becomes a fight that isn't very hard to conquer. The weapons also feel a bit lopsided in that they don't really feel great to use at times. The Doom shotgun is iconic for good reason, and it always will be one of the best weapons in gaming. And while it still is your main weapon for most players in Doom 3, it just isn't nearly as much fun to use. It's kind of weak and requires a player to be right up in the face of enemies, and due to the reloading being introduced in Doom 3, often feels like the clip is too small. And it might sound like I have more negative than positive to say about Doom 3, but I have to basically stress that while it is a different game, and it doesn't quite feel like Doom, it still is a pretty neat game to play around in. It's just not a great Doom game. Overall, Doom 3 is a product of its time, and while it's still a decent game overall, it won't be remembered the same way as any other game in the franchise. id Tech-3 at the time pushed rendering technology forward and showed the future of what gamers can look forward to, but the engine being amazing feels like it overtook the heart of the project and forced the developers into a few corners on the game design side. I still like Doom 3, and I have fond memories of it just because what it represented at the time, but I do have to say, going back and playing it now, it's just not as much fun as I remember. It's still 100% worth a playthrough, but it just doesn't scratch that itch that you want when playing Doom. Doom 2 for many is the best in the series, but for many reasons I find it to be good, but not quite near the top. Doom 2 is a sequel that, while it does improve in many aspects on the original in terms of enemy variety and level variety, it also feels like a game that is kind of held together with duct tape at times. But before we get into that, we need to talk about what makes Doom Doom. And I think now is a good time since we are getting to the games that most people remember in the series. Doom is special for many different reasons to many different people. It can be the memories of playing deathmatch with friends, it can be the modding some of your favorite levels, or it could even be like myself messing around with the game by throwing on cheat codes and just laying waste to everything in your way. Am I the only one that would load up Icon of Sin, put on God mode, and just let the room fill up for an hour, then just kill everything? Let me know in the comments below. Boiling Doom down to just a few aspects might not be fair, but for the sake of time and simplicity, Doom is about a few key elements: level design, enemy design, and player movement. These large elements, along with some other small ones, play a critical role in why Doom plays the way it does, and why it's so easy to pick up and play, and why the franchise is able to be enjoyed by casual players who only play a few levels here and there, and why the modding community is so large that thousands of levels have been created. That being said, Doom 2 at its core is Doom. Everything you love about Doom is here, and the additions of the iconic things like the super shotgun and the pain elemental build upon a foundation that was set by the original. But Doom 2 suffers for me in one key area: level design. The level design for Doom 2 is very inconsistent, that I find myself loving the first set of levels before quickly starting to feel like the best of the levels are in the front of the game, and some of the better ones are also near the end, while the middle is just sort of kinda there. But I don't want to start off negative, and I have to say that the beginning set and the last set of levels are really good. Sometimes they're a little too gimmicky near the end, and sometimes you can get lost, and conveyance is something we'll talk about more in the future. But there's some really good Doom levels here. But talking about Doom levels in general is very hard due to the complexity of the level design versus fun factor, and enemy encounters is something that will always be debated in the Doom community. Some people really like the puzzle aspect of Doom, while others love the combat over the puzzles. And then you have people like me that tend to take a, quote, more mainstream approach, and like a blend of each in a way that meets in the middle and has a good balance of each and every level. That balance just feels a little wonky in Doom 2. This is likely because the maps were designed by different people from the original Doom. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I don't want to get into the depths of who designed which levels from the original and Doom 2 because that can get crazy complicated very fast. But I will say is that the level design of Doom 2 feels way more experimental rather than sticking to a core design philosophy. The word that comes to mind for Doom 2 on the levels I'm not a fan of is usually trolly and too large. There are so many levels where I feel like the designer is just trying to mess with you, and while sometimes that is a good thing to create challenge, most of the time in these levels I feel like I'm caught off guard in a way that not only isn't fair but just isn't fun. Another time the levels are just so large and the solution is very, very cryptic, and finding it naturally is just not going to happen. You're probably going to stumble your way into figuring it out than actually figuring it out, which to me is where a Doom level just sort of isn't great and it falls apart. Doom 2 is constantly dropping into scenarios and moments when you are forced to react in a way that isn't always fun. The newest version of this game available on the Xbox One has a new quick save feature, and honestly, this was a godsend, as I was consistently having to do quick save just to be able to get to see what was coming next, reloading, and then tackling the situation after I knew how it was going to troll me. Yet, you could make the argument this is just part of the core design of Doom, and you could be right depending on who you ask, but the level to which you are trolled in Doom 2 compared to other games in the series just feels a little different. With the exception of master levels, every other Doom game that plays its similar rules just don't feel nearly as cumbersome in this manner. Now, with all that being said, I still think Doom 2 is the opposite of master levels, in which the amount of good levels outweigh the amount of bad. The middle portion of the game and the, quote, city levels are where I have the least amount of fun. These levels tend to be very large for the sake of just being large, and the amount of weird things you have to discover to do is just going to be weird in the end. But the levels leading up to the city portion, and a lot of the levels after, are much stronger. They're filled more with what I love from Doom, which is a good action combined with good puzzles. The addition of the super shotgun is one that I really like, and I think everyone can agree with that, but it adds an extra layer of resource management, as you need to preserve all the ammo that you can. Deciding what weapon to use at what time will play more of a role in this game than in the previous one, and I tend to have the shotgun out still 70% of the time, but that balance is definitely tested. This is something I will talk about more when we get to Doom 2016, but having to juggle a few more plates when combating enemies is something that I think Doom is really good at, and it's strongest when there's more to juggle. While I could do without the chain gunners, I think the rest of the entries in the enemy list are good. The Mancubus is definitely one of the stronger ones, as well as the Archvile has become one of the more iconic enemies. Doom 2 overall is a very solid game, but after playing every game in the series, I was kind of shocked at how much I just didn't like the middle portion of the game. I still had a great time with it, and I still highly recommend it if you're a fan of the original series, but I think most people could see that coming. But that being said, I think it's time to move on to the next entry in the list, which is by far the most surprising to me. Maybe it's because I hadn't played Doom 64 in any real capacity in at least 5 or 6 years, but Doom 64 surprised me quite a bit. I've never played the entire Doom franchise back to back the way I had for this video, but doing that really showed me just how good Doom 64 is. I think you could even call it the true sequel to the original Doom, and I would argue that it did what Doom 3 tried to do, but in a better fashion. Doom 64 is a unique game, and while that it is Doom through and through, it is a different take on Doom with a brand new art style and look that is actually more akin to Doom 3 at times with its horror-like aspects. Every enemy that did make the cut for Doom 64 gets a unique look, and while some of them look similar to how you would expect, there's others like the Pain Elemental that look entirely different, which is something that I always welcome when playing anything new in Doom. Along with the redesigns, the Nightmare Imp is brought into the fold, creating a more deadly version of this classic demon, and it really is just enough to sort of change how you play sometimes, which is obviously the goal of what Doom 64 is trying to do. New, but also familiar. All of this is really to just say that there was some serious care and effort put into Doom 64 to make it something more than just a port, which is really what they could have done instead. Doom 64 is a new game from the ground up, and it shows that the designers of the title really cared about Doom and wanted to make something special. There are a couple things that really stick out to me about Doom 64, but the main being level design and enemy placement. Being able to go into Doom 64 without knowing the exact layout of levels along with enemy placement was extremely exciting. Playing on an easier difficulty other than Ultraviolent on Doom is pretty much unheard of these days, and being able to go into a more classic level design style of Doom gave me the ability to play on the normal difficulty and then ramp it up after my first playthrough just to see how midway it handled the enemy placement from difficulty to difficulty. The original Doom, in my opinion, doesn't get enough credit for having so many different options in this regard that really help the player gradually improve their skills while giving them a new challenge. Being able to do this on Doom 64 was a really neat throwback, and I have to say playing Doom 64 twice and seeing just how different the game can be based on what and where enemies are placed was really, really neat. And on the hardest difficulty, Doom 64, known as Watch Me Die, was not only a really fun time, but it was one that was filled for the most part with a very fair challenge, and I had not really experienced this since the original Doom. Doom 64 is no joke on Watch Me Die. It's the equivalent to Ultraviolent from the original game, and if you have played those, you know the amount of enemies can get crazy at times. Doom 64 is the same way, but the behavior of the enemies and how hard they hit is different. The Lost Souls are the ones that come to mind. I don't have any real evidence other than Wikipedia in terms of how hard they are programmed to hit, but in Doom 64 they feel way more aggressive and more deadly because of this. While a well-placed super shotgun blast can take them out pretty easily, their aggressiveness being amped up truly changes their role in the roster of demons. And due to these changes, you have the Pain Elementals, which many of you know spits out Lost Souls as its main form of offense. When you combine that new behavior with the fact that you can't use the old trick of standing right in front of them to stop them from spawning Lost Souls since they now explode in your face, you have a demon that you thought you knew but now have to take a new measure to defeat them. It's these little changes that make Doom 64 feel familiar but different in a good way. But this wouldn't be nearly as strong if it wasn't for the strong level design of Doom 64. As I have stated before, I tend to like the levels that tend to be a blend of action and puzzles, with the emphasis being more on the action side of it. Every once in a while a good trick or trap is fun to keep things interesting, but I come to Doom to kill demons, so the gimmicks usually don't stick with me after I've completed them. Most of the levels are not gimmicky and rely on weird things to complete them like in Master levels in some parts of Doom 2. And for that reason, I think that's why I found Doom 64 to be much better than I remembered. But let's get into the combat and why I really enjoyed Doom 64 on that aspect. My first playthrough I found myself using the super shotgun, as most of you do in a Doom game, but I found myself using a few other weapons more than I did in other classic Doom games. The chainsaw, for instance, feels much more lethal and sort of locks the demon in more than it does in the original, giving it a real use in the harder difficulties when ammo becomes harder to come by. The rest of the weapons function and act how you feel they should, but the chain gun is the only weapon I found that might be a slight downgrade. I feel like it just doesn't do enough damage. I found myself really only using it for shotgunners and imps and masks, and it became my weapon to use when I ran out of ammo for the shotgun and was waiting till I found more to switch back to it. Now there is a brand new weapon in Doom 64 called the Unmaker that I will get to in a minute, but it actually plays into my criticisms of the games in a very important way. Once you have a couple upgrades on it, I find myself using it over the plasma rifle and the BFG, and I think that is by design. But the Unmaker is a neat idea of having a weapon that can become more powerful over time, which makes it pretty new for the series. And on the topic of the Unmaker, we have to talk a little bit about why Doom 64 isn't at the top of the list. But one of those issues will be mitigated very quickly alongside the release of Doom Eternal. I debated for probably way too long whether to play this game on the original hardware or with Doom 64 EX on PC. Doom 64 EX is indeed mostly the same game with some modern enhancements like different controller support and elevated brightness and gamma, both of which are major issues for a lot of people who try to play the original game on 64. And being able to adjust these is a game changer. But Doom 64 EX is not the original way it was intended to be played. I did decide to go with Doom 64 EX, since we are going to be getting ports on modern hardware very soon alongside the release of Doom Eternal. This port will have better controller support along with the enhanced brightness, and I think because of this, it's going to be an easy suggestion that playing Doom 64 EX or this new port will be the way to go. While that common complaint will be fixed, I do have some other issues with Doom 64. The main being some of the cryptic background stuff that is very easy and some would say impossible to discover without the internet. My first playthrough, I did not consult the internet in any capacity. I wanted to do my best to experience it without knowing anything more than what the game had to offer and my own knowledge throughout the years. And for the most part, I did pretty alright. There were a few levels I got stuck on in terms of bad conveyance, but for the most part, I found Doom 64 to be beatable on normal without the need of all the secrets that lay in wait. But the Unmaker always perplexed me. I felt like I was doing something wrong or just wasn't getting it, because I found this new weapon that appeared to look very powerful. I just couldn't find any real use for it. It didn't do anything that any of the other weapons couldn't, and it didn't hit nearly as hard as I thought it should. Upon further inspection, there's a whole layer of secret levels under the hood that not only make the last level much more manageable, it also provides a path to make the Unmaker much more powerful. But again, after further research, finding these levels can be pretty cryptic, with one of them being borderline impossible to find unless you accidentally stumble into it or have the internet. I'm going to be talking a lot about conveyance in the next entry on this list because I do think it's something important that Doom has had a problem with when it comes to hidden features. The thing about Doom 64 is that it completely locks you out of a really cool feature when it comes to progression. The idea of a long game side quest that will help you out in the end actually is really ambitious for the time, but the likelihood of you finding this quest without prior knowledge is kind of next to zero. One level requires you to hit these switches in a very particular fashion, and as far as I could tell, there wasn't any real way to know which order to hit them in. This one is probably the easiest, with you just basically having to pay attention to a sound cue, but even then it's very easy to miss. But by far the most cryptic is the one where you have to walk into a wall that basically ends up being a fake wall, and again, unless I'm just missing something, there is absolutely no way to discover this organically. But if you are fortunate enough to know about these, you're greeted with not only a much stronger Unmaker once you have all of the demon artifacts, the last level also becomes much easier as the 3 demon gates while facing Mother Demon have also been closed. On the hardest difficulty, not including the hidden one that mimics Nightmare mode, this could be the difference between finishing the game and not. Beating Mother Demon without this knowledge is totally possible, but you're in for one hell of a fight if you do not know about the demon gates being able to be closed. This isn't a big enough flaw to move the game down the list for me. If anything, I think the hidden levels, even though cryptic in nature, them having a long-term effect over the rest of the game still elevates it over hidden levels in other Doom titles. But I do have to talk about some of the trolling that goes on in Doom 64. Like with Doom 2, Doom 64 likes to drop things on the player unexpectedly. For the most part, I find Doom 64 to be really strong because it's fair, but it does suffer from time to time of not being fair at all, and it likes to literally spawn in enemies right in front of you to catch you off guard. From a gameplay context, I believe this was the first time enemies weren't hidden in a monster closet like in other games, but while I think it's kind of a neat thing that they're able to spawn enemies in front of you in real time, it never feels like it comes at a time that is natural and fair. While there is a sound effect and sort of a fade-in effect to warn the player, it seems to always happen in a cramped area with not a lot of movement, which is not really fun. Doom works best when you can move around and not when you are in small areas stuck with 3 Hell Knights. I think Doom 64 is also a bit too closed off of terms of level design from time to time. There are a few too many instances where you are forced to fight something in a small hallway, but again, these moments are vastly outweighed by the strong level design throughout the rest of the game. But there is also a noticeable absence of any real hell-located levels. Doom 64 does a good job of keeping the environments looking different, but the tone is very consistent throughout the game. Going to hell is always something memorable in Doom because it usually represented a drastic change in level design, but it also changed the basics like color and scale. And like I said, it is very noticeable, but it's surprisingly not a deal breaker for me. I think you can make the argument that a few of the levels are just okay, but I can't think of a single level that I thought was flat out bad, and I could not say that for anything past the original Doom games up until this point. Sometimes the conveyance of pressing switches also gets in the way, and you press a switch and you don't really know what it does, and then you kind of go back to the beginning of the level and suddenly something's different. I think this could be sort of conveyed better to the player, but none of this ever really got in the way of me enjoying the game from an overall perspective. Doom 64, like I stated before, really feels like a true sequel to the original game. It has a more familiar level design that I think is stronger than the experimentation taken in subsequent games, and it tries to put in the horror elements like Doom 3 would eventually take a stab at, but it did so while keeping the original strong gameplay that the series is known for intact. It being third on the list caught me by surprise, but I firmly believe it is one of the stronger games in the franchise. It is not perfect by any means, but I found myself enjoying it way more than I expected. But what surprised me the most is that the design of this game is much more akin to the original, and how much that just elevates it for me. After playing all these games back to back, level design has become the most important thing for me when it comes to the classic games, and Doom 64 is very, very strong in this regard, which is probably why it's so high on the list for me. With the re-release coming out very soon, I think a lot of people are going to play this game and be surprised like I was of just how much like the original game it is and how solid it is in the Doom franchise.
I'm willing to take full responsibility for the horrible events of the last 24 hours, but you must understand. Our interest in their world was purely for the betterment of mankind. Everything has clearly gotten out of hand now, yes. But it was worth the risk, I assure you.
To rank Doom 2016 as second in the series might seem crazy, but it's been nearly 4 years since the rebirth of Doom and the Doom Slayer, and after playing Doom 2016 right after the rest of the entire series, I'm ready to say that it gets very close to being the best Doom game ever made. Doom 2016 is a reboot done right, and I suggest that any company trying to bring back an IP or just even forward take a look at what id Software did with Doom 2016. Like I said earlier, there are some core pillars of Doom that make Doom what it is, and the lead up to Doom 2016 was one filled with a lot of uneasiness but hopefulness as well. How can a game that hasn't had an entry in over 10 years, in which the last entry was arguably the worst mainline entry in the series, without the original team that made the game so great, possibly have a chance at being not only good, but one of the best shooters ever made? Well, somehow id Software did it. Doom 2016 for me took a lot of what made Doom great and modernized it in ways that not only made sense, but did so in a way that keeps the overall ideas and goals of the original Doom intact, even though technology has changed how people look and create games. The glory kill system is one that caused a lot of debate when it was first shown, and to this day some people claim it completely ruins the game. While I'm usually the type of person to hear one side's argument from any side and try to figure out and understand where they are coming from, this is one I just don't understand. The reason I bring this up is because the idea of glory kills plays into what id has branded as push forward combat. This mechanic is truly the soul of Doom 2016, and from everything we have seen so far from Doom Eternal, is being built upon in the sequel and is still the main focus for good reason. Doom has always been about pushing forward and making your way to the end, but it's fair to say unless you are very good at Doom and know where every secret is hidden, there are times you'll be low on health and run out of ammo. Even to this day, as many times as I have finished the original Doom, I still run out of ammo in later levels because even if you are the best at Doom, you are going to make some mistakes from time to time, and the randomness of the game structure will get the better of you. The parts of Doom where you're looking around for ammo and health after a fight could be argued as the lull of Doom. It isn't bad per se, but it's the part of the game that could be improved. Wandering around in Doom is something that I think a lot of the hardcore and longtime fans have forgotten about. They have played Doom for so long that they know the ins and outs of how it works, and have seen behind the curtain. They know what pressure plates are, they know how to listen for things in the background, they know where a monster closet is likely to be hiding. But all of this comes from years of playing, and only the masters of Doom will remember all of its ins and outs. When it comes to Doom, I think by far the easiest criticism can be the conveyance, and Doom at times can be extremely bad with its conveyance. When it comes to finding secrets and what to do next, it can be borderline impossible for a player to crack the Doom code. I'm sure there are secrets that I'm still not aware of to this day in the classic games, and that's just a testament to how bad or well you could argue that the secrets are hidden. I am by no means a game designer, but I have a feeling that Doom 2016 from a design perspective wanted to solve this issue as well as bring the franchise forward. This is where and how glory kills combined with push forward combat comes into play, and without it, Doom 2016 would suffer. If it was simply a game where you have to hunt for ammo that's tucked away in secrets and nooks and crannies, it too would suffer from bad conveyance. If there's anything that stops the flow of Doom, it's the hunt for ammo and health, not glory kills. Push forward combat keeps the player always moving and allows the player to know that they are going in the right direction, and conveys a sense of accomplishment from room to room that engages the player in a way that's far greater than in anything of the previous titles. And it does all of this while focusing on speed and skill. Every demon presents a slightly different challenge, just like the classic Doom. Some will require the player to be a good shot, while others will require you to be quick on your feet to make sure you don't get bombarded. When you add that with the inclusion of the verticality that has never really been done in any capacity in the series, it presents even more challenges for you to overcome. Combat has been crafted into something that really emphasizes skill over survival in many regards. Finding the best combination that works for you is a test in itself, and it's a test of your skill over and over, and it's a blast to figure out exactly which works best. And even when you have that figured out exactly, you have the different combination of demons to contest with you and to keep you on your toes. In this instance, the Pinky comes to mind. It has essentially evolved into a bowl and charges at you, and when it hits you really hard. This is one of the many different aspects that the players now have to juggle, and knowing the situation, and then assessing it and coming up with a plan of attack, and it's far more intricate than anything else that the series has ever done. It's this complexity that makes Doom 2016 just work, but it also does it while not forgetting its roots and evolves it in a way that not only feels modern, but feels different in the shooter space. When you combine the new things like push forward combat and the old things like the super shotgun and revenants trying to constantly end your life, you have a game that is really familiar under the hood, but you don't really see it and feel it till you pick up the controller. The complex maps, enemy hordes, no reloading, fast movement from the original are all here intact and accounted for. It looks different and feels a bit different for sure, but when you compare Doom 2016 to those games of the past, it is indeed Doom in full capacity, but now with elements that push the IP forward and solve some of its lingering issues. You might have noticed that story is something that I have barely touched on in any capacity, and that isn't by mistake. Doom does indeed have a story, but it never and likely will never be the focal point of the series. But even with that in mind, Doom 2016 takes a stab at creating a story crafted around the Doom lore, and due to how it's presented, is shockingly one of the best parts of the package. Doom 2016 knows what it is, and it's about a guy that has one goal, and that goal is to rid the entire universe of hell and its demons. And throughout the campaign, when there are subtle moments of story, they are told in a way that never interferes with the gameplay in true Doom fashion. But it took it even one step further by dropping inside the Codex and giving players a ton of lore to dive into if they wish, and there is something really awesome in the Codex. The way the demons have a mythology-type history of the Doomslayer being looked at as God and it's the only thing that demons truly fear is not only awesome, but it's hilarious. The way anytime the Doomslayer reacts to Samuel Hayden in a fashion that is basically a middle finger never gets old. As a fan of Doom, I have never wanted a story, but that changed in Doom 2016. It somehow created a real character and world based off of a few subtle interactions, and they did it in a way that is not only smart, but it does not get in the way. And along with this topic, I want to talk about the presentation, and I have to say that going back to Doom 2016 on the Xbox One X and doing a playthrough after seeing so many retro games, Doom 2016 is a fantastic looking game. It has a strong presence and can't be mistaken for any other game the way shooters sometimes can in the modern era. The way it modernized the demons to look similar yet different took some truly talented artists, and it shows that they have a real love and understanding of Doom. From top to bottom, the presentation is sharp, unique, and genuinely fun to look at. Doom 2016 also brought back something that to me that was severely lacking in Doom since the original game: music. The soundtrack created by Mick Gordon for Doom 2016 is so satisfying. For me, the music in the original Doom has stuck out more than any in the franchise. Doom 2 does have some good music here and there, but it doesn't match the quality from start to finish the way the original Doom did. Doom 3 was all about atmosphere, so there was a lack of music entirely, and while Doom 64 did have music, it was more akin to horror rather than metal and rock soundtrack. It's very good, but it's just not the same. Doom 2016, on the other hand, nails what the original game did, and that's music that just makes you want to hunt and kill demons. So yeah, I really like Doom 2016. But even after all that praise, there are a couple things that are holding it back from topping the list. Doom 2016 does suffer from pacing issues around the middle of the campaign. As much as I love battling demons and finding secrets in between battles, there is a big emphasis on map design that really holds back Doom 2016. And when the map design is not quite there or is repeated, it sticks out a bit more than the classic games. This is probably because the combat is even more integral to the experience, whereas the classic games had more of a blended experience. The middle of Doom 2016 features a map that you basically play twice. Once while it's intact and another while it's destroyed. And even though the second time through things are a little bit different and you visit some rooms that you didn't the first time through, it still feels like the same level with mostly the same enemies. And with the emphasis on the combat being more important than ever, fighting mostly the same enemies in the same areas is exactly what you don't want in Doom 2016. Along with that, there are a few times that the game wants to turn into a platformer instead of Doom. Now don't get me wrong, the verticality of Doom 2016 is a good thing. It allows for more and deeper combat scenarios, but there are a few times when the game sort of stops everything to do some jumping. I understand this is for the sake of variety, but they usually feel too long in this capacity. I am all for some interesting movement and gameplay, but this isn't a platformer. The platforming feels good in terms of how it feels to grab onto ledges and go from area to area, but when it becomes a full-on platformer with no demons to kill, it's just kind of weird. Luckily, those issues are not anything that kills the experience. The platforming sections are very few and very far in between, and the latter half of the game is by far the strongest parts of the campaign, and it finishes very strong with the combat scenarios that are engaging, different, and combining all of that is what Doom 2016 does very well. Now, this isn't a video about Doom Eternal, but I have to say that Doom 2016 showed that it really is onto something here, and they are building upon the foundation of Doom 2016. And with that, you have the potential to make one of the best games ever. That might sound hyperbolic and unrealistic, but I really do believe it. Doom 2016 is not only a great Doom game, but it's just a well-made video game. It has a clear vision of what it wants to be, and it nails its objective, which is just making a fun first-person shooter, and you feel awesome while playing it. But it also brings in that gore and just that viciousness that you want from a Doom game in the modern era. I really don't know how they did it, but I can say that with certainty, it is one of the best Doom games ever made. But now we have to move on to the top spot, and by now you've probably figured out what it is. It's hard to beat the original, and in the case of Doom, it's a true statement. I do want to say that I had an internal debate on if Doom 2016 is better than the original Doom for quite a while, but I did ultimately end up on Doom being the best because I really can't find much, if anything, wrong with it. Which makes Doom a bit more difficult to talk about when everything just works. Going through this list, I've talked about what makes Doom Doom, and for me, every game has been chasing the original and nothing has quite surpassed it. The original game is obviously revolutionary for not only the genre of the FPS, but it's a staple in the history of video games. It did so many things not thought possible, but also at its core, it's a video game that is crafted with such precision and passion that to this day, new players can still engage with it. Everything about Doom just flows. The weapons, the enemies, the music, the puzzles. Everything just works in a way that is very hard to criticize, because if you look at what Doom set out to do from a design perspective, it doesn't really miss a single beat. The weapons are fun to use, the levels are fun to explore, and it's full of hidden secrets. The music and sound effects blend together to create something evil but energizing, and when you finish the game you can boot it right back up and play it again and still have just as much fun. Everything from crucial aspects like level design and enemy placement to the more subtle design choices like eyes as switches are crafted in a way that makes everything look and feel memorable. For me, the level design of the original Doom is what sticks out the most. From episode to episode, you are given a very distinct style, and every episode has a flow that ends with a climactic boss fight. I like the contrast from episode to episode, from a design perspective visually, but as well as mechanically. Knee Deep in the Dead gives the player a lot more wiggle room in terms of finding ammo, which allows the player to grow with Doom's difficulty curve and challenge. So when they get to Inferno, they're given a lot less ammo, and from that point they've had to improve their skills and shooting to achieve success. The demon placement in every map feels deliberate in a good way, that shows it was play tested to death, and when it does like to sometimes drop you in situations that are not ideal, it never really feels that unfair. Something I really enjoy about the OG game that I really felt only in Doom 64 at times was the use of some of the lower class demons to give you some cannon fodder. Sometimes you really just want to take out 3 to 4 shotgunners and a zombie man with a single shotgun blast. And blending that with the higher health demons is key to making a map that is fun to play, which is something I feel like Doom 2 forgot at times. The original Doom doesn't ever try to play with gimmicks the way the sequels dabbled into from time to time. The original Doom is the only game that I feel like sticks to its core philosophy, which is important level design and strong combat scenarios, and everything else around it plays into that core design. Even as much as I love Doom 2016, that's where it falls short. Sometimes I think it forgets what its core philosophy is supposed to be, but the original Doom never does that. The music to this day is still iconic, and while it might be inspired by songs from bands like Metallica and Slayer, every single track is very distinct. From the start of the game with E1M1's Hangar, the music sets the mood to gear the player up for hardcore action, and then at the end with the low dark tones of E1M1's Phobos Anomaly, every track has a purpose. Like I said earlier, every game in the series has been chasing the original bar set by Doom, and while I think Doom 2016 comes the closest, it still doesn't quite get there. The original Doom is just that good. It's a game that relies on one thing, being a good shooter, and if you get lost in one of the maps, it's never overly complicated and cryptic the way the sequels can be. And in the case of Doom 2016, it does not rely on the same thing twice, and doesn't overstay its welcome at times. Will anything ever surpass the original Doom? Probably not. And honestly, that's okay. And with that, we've come to the end of the list. I wish there was more to say about Doom, but like I said, I can't find a lot wrong, so sitting here just trying to critique and find little things is pointless. Again, the original game is just that good. But that's going to do it for my list. Let me know what Doom game is your favorite in the comments below, and also let me know if you're excited about Doom Eternal. Hit that like and subscribe button, it really helps us out, and we'll see you next time.